Okay, so now let's get into it. So, an introduction to teletherapy. I'm going to just turn my camera off because you guys know what I look like now. Okay, so let's talk about who I am. So I'm Brooke Dibley and I'm a SLP for 7 years. I have been private for 3 years in my practice, and for 2 of those years I've been doing teletherapy as well. At the moment I'm about 50% in-person, 50% teletherapy. And I also am a store owner and blogger under Simply Speaking SLT as well. So I've got 2 brands with the same name. One's my blog, Speech Therapy Kind of Essence, and the other one is my private practice. So I've just included in the notes here that you're downloading a link to my Instagram, Facebook, and blog, because especially right now with all the COVID-19 stuff going on, I am sharing a lot of tips and ideas about teletherapy, and whenever anyone else is sharing tips and ideas, I'm also sharing them to my stories on Instagram. So it's a good place to go to find all the information in one place. All right, so for most of this presentation, I'm not just going to read off the slides, but for the next 3 slides I am, because I really want this to kind of hone home, and because these are great words that cover what teletherapy is. This is from a website online, and I just really like how they describe what teletherapy is. So teletherapy is the online delivery of speech therapy services via high resolution live video conferencing. Teletherapy sessions are very similar to traditional speech therapy sessions, with one major exception. Instead of sitting in the same room, students and the therapist interact via live video conferencing. During therapy sessions, the student and the therapist can see, hear, and interact with one another in real time using webcams, headsets, and a live, synchronized online learning environment. So I really like that explanation of what teletherapy is, because a lot of the time when I talk to parents about doing therapy online, they think I mean like a robot app or something like that, and they can get iffy fast, and I totally get that. So I just really like this wording, and that's why I've included it in here, because the big key, guys, that I'm going to go over and over again today is the actual therapy that you do is the same as you would do face-to-face, only teletherapy is done with a computer. Okay, so now let's talk about what you will need. So you will need a good internet connection. For you personally as the therapist, if you are able to participate in this live webinar here, then you have a good internet connection to be able to do teletherapy. You'll need a computer with a webcam, because you want to be able to interact face-to-face with your student using your webcam. Now, a headset is ideal, but not essential. I don't use a headset because I have a podcast level microphone that provides really nice, clear audio for my students. However, I would encourage you not to just rely on the inbuilt microphone on your computer. Often they are not that great, and also they're quite far away from you, and you can have a lot of echo off your desk. So a headset takes away all that echo off the desk, which can distort your audio. You can get these headsets quite cheap from places like Noel Leeming and the Warehouse and places like that. Some platforms will work with the headphones that come with your phones, like the iPhone headphones. However, I do know the platform I use don't recommend that. And the last thing you're going to need is a secure teletherapy platform. And we're going to talk more tonight about how to choose a teletherapy platform and what to look out for. But that's just an overview of the 4 things you need as the therapist to do teletherapy. Let's talk about what your students will need. Your students will also need a good internet connection. And to be honest, this is where your biggest barrier that is pretty impossible to overcome will arise. Most of the other barriers that come up with teletherapy, there is a way to get around them, to be creative and use your clinical reasoning skills. But the good internet connection, if your student doesn't have it, they don't have it. And unfortunately, there's often not much we can do about it. Please consider this for our low socioeconomic families. They may not be able to afford super fast internet. This is different if you're talking about during term time when a kid is in school. Often I do therapy sessions with my students while they're in school. However, I understand that this webinar has come up to be has been asked for because of this potential of schools closing as well as our clinics closing. So the way I get around that normally is see if we can do the teletherapy sessions at school, and the parent goes into the school and takes the kid out of class with their device, which most of them have anyway, finds a quiet space at school, and we do therapy online that way. Other than a solution like that, this is can be the biggest barrier. So the device with a webcam, we'll talk about in a moment, recommendations for students and what they use for a device and what's a good device for them to have. You definitely have to have a more high-tech device than they do, because you've got to be able to, well, it doesn't have to be super high-tech, but I suggest you use a computer. Not you as the therapist. Don't use a tablet, don't use a Chromebook, use a computer or a laptop. Okay, so an adult present is important because of if there's technological issues, you can always call the parent or the teacher aide or the adult present and say, hey, like, I can't hear them, can you just check their microphones on, those kind of things. The kids pick up on it pretty quickly anyway, but it is nice to just know there's an adult that you can call, and if there's some technological issues. This is just like when you're doing in-person therapy. You would hope that the parent is there so that they can learn from you. The reality is sometimes they're cooking dinner when you're there in person, and the same is to be said for teletherapy. Sometimes they're cooking dinner, and that's okay. Or they're using that time to do something else around the house. So, and we just have to do the best we can, just like we would do in person, and work with that family member as best we can. And now the ability to attend to the screen. There's a caveat here. If you're doing early intervention with late talkers, many teletherapists who do teletherapy full-time will do a parent coaching approach. So therefore you don't actually need the child there to be able to attend to the screen. They often will have the parent video themselves playing with their student, their child, and then together they can share the video on the screen, talk about it, and the therapist can give tips and ideas. One thing I want to point out, guys, this idea of teletherapy right now us here in New Zealand may seem like this this alternative to in-person therapy that's not as good. That's like a lesser version of therapy. In America, where this is just normal practice, that is not the case. Most schools have a in-person therapist and a teletherapist. They're both exactly the same in the way that they're viewed. They split the school in half, and the teletherapist takes half and the in-person therapist takes half, and that's that. It's not seen as one kid's getting better therapy than the other. And so I just wanted to point that out while we're on that slide. Sorry, I just hit my microphone. Okay, cool. So let's talk a little bit more about devices for your students. So many of them will have Chromebooks because of the BYO nature of schools these days. A lot of them, they can work for teletherapy, but just know they can be glitchy. And if they're using a Chromebook and you share your screen and the platform you use has mouse controls, which we'll talk about later, they won't be able to control the screen because they're viewing your meeting from within a browser window as opposed to a software that's on their computer. So computers are the best, like laptops or whatever the family have, but you can use a Chromebook. Just know you're not going to be able to use as many features. Same with tablets. Tablets are exactly the same. And now another thing I'd like to point out is if I had to choose between Chromebooks and a tablet, I'd choose for my kid to have a Chromebook, and this is why. Often, if a child is on a computer or a Chromebook, they're generally sat up at a table or a desk, or they're sat somewhere, the computer is up on a platform and they're sitting looking at it. With an iPad, when the child's holding it, they might be lying on their bed, they might be just moving all around, and it might be a little more relaxed, or on the couch, whereas it's, and you're just you're more likely to lose your view of the child that way. And so, yeah, I definitely would prefer, I personally prefer my students to use a computer or a Chromebook. So yeah, that's why I've put here, consider where therapy will happen. The same goes for environment. So some might say that you shouldn't do teletherapy unless you know the environment your student is going to be in is going to be perfect. But I'd like to point out that when you go in person to do therapy, you don't walk into a therapy space, especially if you visit your students in schools or in their home and say, oh, this is not optimal for therapy today, I'm walking out. We don't do that in person. So I'd just like to remind people of that with teletherapy, so that, yeah, some days my kid's dog, this client's dog is having a big yap, and we just have to deal with it as it comes. You deal with the environmental stuff as it comes. The mum's phone might ring and she might be having a big loud chat and you just have to ask her to step away. All these kind of things, just like you would normally do in person. Okay, what your students don't need, which might come as a surprise to you, is computer, mouse, and keyboard skills. I've had a ton of students that don't have these skills because a lot of the students of today, a lot of the kids of today, they've got really good tablet-based skills and touchscreen skills, but they're not used to using a keyboard or a mouse. Now, this depends on what you're targeting, but if you're targeting, for example, articulation, you don't need them to actually interact with your screen. And to be honest, it adds an extra element of language needed because they have to tell you what they want you to click. They're not going to be playing the game interactively, but they have to tell you what they want to happen. So obviously, if you're working on something where the children need to type, so you're working on maybe sentence structure with typing or something with spelling, then of course your students are going to need typing skills. But again, if they're old enough to be working on those kind of goals, they may more likely be having those typing skills. So obviously, just use your clinical reasoning when it comes to that there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about choosing a teletherapy platform. The word platform just means the space in which you do therapy, the online meeting space. So I'm not seeing any questions in the chat box, so I'm assuming that means that we're all still on the same page. Okay, so these are my must-have features, in my experience, what I feel are must-have features for a good teletherapy space. That does not mean that a space needs all of these things for you to be able to go and use it for therapy, except for that first one. The ability, the fact that something is secure and encrypted is something that I definitely advocate for. So HIPAA is an American legislation around privacy. So of course it doesn't apply to us here in New Zealand, but this is a high level of encryption that we as therapists here in New Zealand can see a platform as being HIPAA compliant and know that it's going to be safe and privacy is when it comes to privacy for our students. So I really highly recommend a HIPAA compliant platform. Something I'm going to say about this, so for example, Zoom, right? Zoom has different levels. So the free version of Zoom and even some of the lower paid versions of Zoom, they're not HIPAA compliant. It's the $200 a month one that's HIPAA compliant. So just don't get caught out that way. Don't worry, the ones I'm going to show you are not $200 a month, but I just want to point that out. So not all HIPAA compliance is across all tiered funding schemes for a lot of these platforms, and some of them are free and HIPAA compliant, but may not have these features I'm talking about. So the ability to resize and change the camera views, really important, because in my opinion, especially if you're working on articulation or motor speech, where you want to be able to see placement. If any of you have watched the YouTube video, which hopefully you have, I did a YouTube video that I linked in the description of this event, which shows me resizing camera views and how I use the platform I use. It's so that we can go from quickly sharing our screen, playing a game, to like, nope, I want our faces really big right next to each other so I can see what's happening and I can take away distractions and we can just talk to each other. So detaching cameras is another thing I like to be able to do, because I personally can detach the camera and put it full screen on my other monitor. This is something that would only apply to you if you have two monitors. I have two monitors. If not, then detaching a camera probably not going to matter so much to you. It just means you can kind of pull it away from the display and put it somewhere else, which you will have seen me do in the YouTube video as well. So being able to lock a meeting room means that I can use the same link for every client. They can come to the session and then I lock the meeting room, and if the next student shows up before I'm finished with my current student, they won't be able to get in and they'll just be put in like a virtual queue. I'll be notified that they're waiting. Then once my other student's gone, I can let them in. So that's why I like a meeting room you can lock. It's not essential, again, these are just ideal, because if you don't have a locked meeting room, you would just create a different meeting ID and a different link for each session you have that day, so that when your next student comes in, it will be an empty room and you'll just come in and join them once you have finished your current session. So it's just something for me that makes a good therapy platform. The fact that you can give give your client your mouse and keyboard controls, for me, is a deal breaker. If a teletherapy platform does not have this, I don't want to use it, because I want to be able to have my students play, especially if they have mouse and keyboard controls. I want them to be able to interact with what's on my computer. So if we're doing a worksheet together, I want them to be able to annotate. I want them to be able to type. And so by giving them mouse and keyboard controls, what your computer does is it sees whatever they do with their mouse and it happens on your screen. Whatever they type on their keyboard, it types into your screen, and then you can see it together. So this here is the number one feature that many of the more speech therapy purpose-built platforms don't have, and is the reason why I don't use them. And then another one is we want it to be easy for our clients to use on their end. So obviously, guys, hint, hint, I use GoToMeeting, which we'll talk about in a minute. And as you guys have seen through the process of me giving you the link to you getting here, that's the process that all my students go through. And once they have the app on their computer, they don't have to download the app again. They just hit the button, the link, and it will bring them to the meeting. So you need to think about what kind of technological skills the person on the other end has. So I'm going to cover that very soon. I'm just seeing a question. So let's look at your platform options. Every platform option shown here is HIPAA compliant at some level. You've got two kinds. You've got this specifically for SLPs built ones, which I don't use because they don't have all the features I want. Then you've got the general telecommunication type meeting spaces like this, which could be used for businessmen, but it also often is used for doctors and psychologists and OTs. And the ones with the asterisks are ones I've tried. The ones with the double asterisks are ones that have all of my must-have features. When I used these, when I tried them, they did not have the ability to share mouse controls, because these three here, the specifically for SLPs ones, they were all browser-based, and while they sell that as a plus, because there's no sign-in or download required, there's no sign-in for GoToMeeting either, but while there's no download required, you're working within a browser which is not as stable as software, and that's the reason that you aren't able to share you aren't able to give mouse controls. You can share your screen but not give mouse controls. So I'll leave this for you guys to look at. I obviously use GoToMeeting, and we'll talk about that in a second, but these three here I haven't looked into, but I do know DoxyMe is free, I believe, or maybe it's WebEx. No, I think it's DoxyMe is free, but again, it doesn't have all those features I've talked about. These are all HIPAA compliant, but it doesn't have some of those nice shiny things, especially the ability to resize your cameras. I don't think DoxyMe has. Okay, so now the platform I use, GoToMeeting, because it has all those features. Now, really something I want to point out, GoToMeeting has two different levels of features and tiered pricing. All levels of GoToMeeting are HIPAA compliant. So all levels are. I choose the business level one, which is $19 American a month, because it has that meeting lock, the ability to lock your meeting room. But you could use the lower $14 a month US dollars version and create new meeting IDs for all of your students, which works fine. I mean, you can make it all sync up with your calendar. It can all work very seamlessly, but I'm willing to pay that $5 extra a month for that meeting lock, so I only have to keep track of one meeting room. And I'm not affiliated with them, by the way, guys. I'm just someone that's tested a lot of platforms and finally landed on this one. One I forgot to add to the list is Adobe Connect. The reason I didn't add it to the list is Adobe Connect is not user-friendly. It does not look like the types of telecommunication software that you're used to, so I didn't include it on the list, and it is $50 American a month, but if you really don't like GoToMeeting, you could check that out. But it is not user-friendly, in my opinion, and getting a free trial is a bit of a mission, in my experience. Okay, the big question, this is like the biggest question I get asked after which platform you should use, and that is how much you should charge. Okay, some things to consider. How long will your sessions be? So, this is not a lesser form of therapy, and there is no reason you should charge any less for your services, unless, of course, you're someone that chooses to charge less for a shorter session. For me personally, my in-person sessions happen at a school. So I go visit kids at school, and so therefore my sessions take a lot longer because you've got all the faff. You have to sign in, you have to get the kid out of class, you have to find the space you're working in, you have to get set up, all that stuff. And so my teletherapy sessions are much shorter. So my in-person sessions are 45 minutes to an hour, and my teletherapy sessions are 30 minutes to 45 if the kid really needs it. But most of the time we can get all the work I would normally get done in like a 45, 60-minute session. I can get done in a 30-minute teletherapy session because there's less faffing around. And are you saving the parent time and money? So if you're someone where the kids normally come to you, well, are you saving them petrol money now? Are they not having to go get all their kids from daycare to come bring their one kid to your session? Are you fitting in better with their lifestyle? You're not providing them a lesser service. So just remember that. Price according to these other things that you should consider as well. Time and the efficiency you're giving a parent. Okay. Can you tell I got a soapbox about this? All right. So we've talked about platforms, and if you have any questions about platforms, go ahead and pop them in the question box. So let's talk now about the types of materials you can use. So I've said over and over again that this is just like you would do in therapy, just like normal therapy, and you might be thinking, but I can't play Pop-Up Pirate in teletherapy, and I can't play my Connect 4. I get that. I do get that. The therapy's the same. Your clinical, your evidence-based practice is still the same in the sense of, for example, I know that the principles of motor planning are really important for articulation therapy. So I'm going to want to try and get in at least 100 trials for a session. So I'm going to do whatever I can online to get in 100 trials. So that's what I mean by you're not changing up how you therapize. And a lot of the time you can use what you have. So here's a few types, and I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of these soon. But static PDFs, which I showed you in the YouTube video, how to use those. So they're, worksheets you would normally print, except you bring them up in something like Adobe Acrobat Reader, which is free on Mac and Windows. And you can add text boxes, you can write. I've shown you how I would use articulation cards in that way in the YouTube video that I linked to in the description of this event. So yeah, static PDFs are the best way to use what you have. And in this season, if you're someone who's considering teletherapy for just a short while, you may choose to just stick with what you have. I will show you some things that are other things that are free online that are great that you can use, and then I'll also show you some paid things that if you are someone that's looking at doing this longer term that you might consider investing in. So there's interactive PDFs, we'll look at what that means. Boom cards, we'll look at what those are. PowerPoint games, Google Slides, videos are great. You can share videos of books, you can share videos of social situations, videos of your child's interest. So actually I find it easier to individualize therapy and teletherapy than I do in person. I do it in person, it's just more work and more planning, because if you've got a student that's just really into like PJ masks right now, you can find a video about PJ masks, and you can find all your speech words that were in the video, or you can ask your language questions about the video, you can sequence the video, all these things. You could find like a blog post about it, or they'll probably have a website. I bet you if it's, let's just say it's made by Disney, they'll have their own web page for it. All those kind of things. Websites are to be my go-to, and I have linked in the notes I've given you on the last slide, there's a bunch of resources. I've linked to a blog post which lists a ton of websites you might want to use, and I'm going to demonstrate a bunch of them here. Ebooks, another great example. And then online games, online manipulatives, and an online whiteboard. So we'll have a look at most of these soon. So, all right. This is just a few things about where you can find materials if you're wanting to find new materials. And this is more around, most of these are paid but have some free. So you can, like I said, you can use what you have. Teachers Pay Teachers have a bunch. Most of the no-print teletherapy resources on Teachers Pay Teachers are made by speech therapists who do teletherapy every day, who do evidence-based practice every day. And the reality is they realize there's just not as much stuff for them. So they've made it. And then they're like, well, let's share it with everyone. And, they deserve to be paid for the intellectual property. So there are a bunch on Teachers Pay Teachers. Obviously, use your clinical reasoning and your evidence-based practice knowledge when picking a resource, but these are on-the-ground therapists that do this every day. Boom Learning is another place you can find really awesome interactive decks of interactive cards, really. Actually, over here, what you're seeing in this picture is a Boom game, which we'll have a look at Boom in a moment. I'm going to show you my library and the types of cards, but they're really awesome. Most people that sell Boom cards in the Boom store library, they also have them for sale on Teachers Pay Teachers. It's all the exact same thing. They're just posting them in both places. Then there's my store, because I create teletherapy resources and it is on Teachers Pay Teachers. Another way to keep up to date with information about teletherapy and materials is to follow these two hashtags on social media. And then there's Facebook groups, which I've linked below, and a lot of us share about materials, free websites we find, paid ones, all that kind of stuff. Oh, I hope you're all still with me. Hang in there. Okay. So the demonstration stuff's coming. That's the fun stuff. All right. So now we're getting into the part where I'm going to talk to you about some of the questions that we had yesterday that were really good questions. So assessment, huge question, comes up a lot. So use what you have is something I'm saying over and over again. Some of you might have those big, assessment books and things like that. You can buy a document camera that connects up with a USB to your computer, and you would just change your camera feed or add it as a camera feed. It's kind of a tutorial for another day, but it can be done, and it's made for you to be able to stream anything you put under the document camera. You simply would put the item on your desk. You can flip through the stimulus book, and the kid can see it. Obviously, check the terms of use of your of the assessment that you're using, but I don't see why it should be a problem. You're not sharing this online. You're not creating digital copies. You're just streaming to your video conference what is on your desk. But document cameras are really expensive, and what I use, because I don't have to use them very often, what I do use is I just use my iPad or another smartphone I have around in a drawer, and I use something called Reflector 3, and I've linked to it on the resource page in these notes. Reflector 3 is like $14, and it lets you mirror whatever your phone or your iPad is seeing. It will mirror to your lesson. So I just turn the camera on my phone, on my device, so that it's looking down at the document, and then it will stream through into the session. So again, that's kind of a tutorial for another day. You can always reach out to me if you have any questions about that, or if you want me to film a tutorial. And then there's also Q Global. So Q Global, I would recommend to anyone who really wants to go digital, whether it's in person, you'd rather have everything on an iPad or in your computer and not have to lug around things, or as someone who's like, yeah, I'm all about teletherapy. Because Q Global, you pay the exact same amount as you would for, so Pearson, it's by Pearson, I believe. And so, for example, you buy the South 5 Q Global pack, you're paying the exact same amount as you would for the physical item. So it's quite expensive. But then you have the license to use it, and it's a digital pack, and it's been made for you to administer digitally. Now, the reason there's not as much information out there on assessment, when you look at blog posts and stuff, most of the information is coming out of America, is those people are employed by huge teletherapy companies. And so these huge teletherapy companies give them all Q Global, and they're not really realizing as a private therapist how much that costs, but they're all like, oh yeah, just use Q Global. So that's just a little bit of insight for you guys. And it's great that they have that. That's awesome. Okay, so I am seeing some questions which I'll look at in just a second. So we're going to talk about sensory needs, behaviors, and visuals now. These still matter, and you should still use them. Your computer does not take away your clinical reasoning skills. So when it comes to visuals, teletherapy is the most visual kind of speech therapy you could do, because you control what's in front of their face. You control what that child is attending to. I want you to picture this. You're in a therapy room. You've got your visual schedule on the table. You've got Pop-Up Pirate on the table. You've got your speech cards on the table. And next to you, you have a therapy bag full of really fun-looking things. There are many things in that space that we as therapists have gotten really used to controlling the attention of. You're like, no, we're not looking in my bag right now. No, we're not doing this. So teletherapy is even more directed when it comes to attention, in my opinion, because you control what the child sees. And I've actually had sessions go better in teletherapy than they do in person, but due to those distractible kind of kiddos. Especially if they're attending, and most of our kids are gonna really like technology. I'm gonna say this. You're probably way more, if this is something that's overwhelming you, and that's fair enough if it is, I'm doing this to kind of shed some light and demystify it, but I get that it can be overwhelming, especially if technology is not something that you're really passionate about. But just know you're more iffy about this than your students are. Your students use these things all day, every day. They're just like, oh yeah, okay, cool, yep, I'm going to go do therapy on my computer. It's just normal to them. They're all at school doing like mathematics and reading eggs and all this stuff on their devices all day, and you're just adding an extra element of fun because you're actually there with them doing it. So I just want to point that out. But this doesn't mean that we're just going to assume that all of our students' needs are going to go away because we're doing this fun thing. So you still should use visuals. If your students have sensory needs, I would hope that we're advocating for them to have things in the home that help them get them met, so that when they need a sensory break, that they can use them just like we would want them to be normally. And same with movement breaks, all that stuff. Timers. I'm going to show you a place where you can get digital timers. So the reason I'm covering this is because a lot of people see this as a reason why to not do teletherapy. And teletherapy is not going to be right for all your kids. But don't let it be a reason not to try, especially if it's the difference between your students getting services and not. Okay, so I'll get off my soapbox now. Okay, adults. I did have some questions about adults. This is something that, again, there's not as much information out there for, because in America, I believe it's Medicaid, don't quote me on that, don't fund adult teletherapy, but then like another system, or maybe Medicaid, I don't know, that another system is of funding funds the pediatric teletherapy. So that's why there's so much information out there about pediatric teletherapy, because there's more pediatric teletherapists than there are adult teletherapists. I have heard, I believe, let me know in the chat if this is accurate, that the Waikato DHB does teletherapy with their adult patients that are out the rural hospitals. That's kind of through the grapevine though, so let me know in the chat if that's accurate, if you've heard the same. But it's so that clients can get one-on-one therapy services out at the smaller hospitals with the clinicians that are based at Waikato. And so also another thing to consider is obviously technological skills. However, I used to work in stroke rehab, and most of my patients' goals were like, want to be able to check my emails, want to be able to sign in and remember my password, want to be able to use Google Maps, like want to be able to, so many of them were in message forums and Facebook groups. And so you might find that the online tasks may be really functional therapy activities for your adults. Obviously it's not going to be right for everyone. You can't do a video fluoroscopy via teletherapy. I mean, maybe you can. I definitely don't think you can. So again, use your clinical reasoning. TalkPath is an online aphasia therapy interactives website, which I used to use in person all the time and take my iPad or my computer. I believe it's free on the computer for anyone, which is awesome. So do check that out. It has great interactive games and activities, and they're self-checking, which is great, and they're adult appropriate. The clip art's a bit iffy, like it's pretty old school, but yeah, they work pretty good, and they'd be great for teletherapy. I have not done adult teletherapy, just so you know, but this is my insights based on doing in-person adult therapy. Okay. Oh, one more thing I want to say about adults. I do know that there are like full-on whole companies in America that do teletherapy online and have great success, especially around aphasia. I think it's called SLP Toolbox, maybe? I don't know, Aphasia Toolbox. I think they're like mostly online. Okay, we're going to talk about giving homework now, and then I think it's demo time. Okay, so this is the last me talking at you before I show you some things. So, giving homework. This is, so in a traditional therapy session, I would often use in my traditional therapy session in person the same activities I'd then turn around and give the parent to go use at home, because we want them to go and use it, and we've just modeled it for the last 45 minutes of how to use it. This is the thing that is different. I do not do this with my parents, because often the stuff I use in teletherapy, because of the nature of how I do therapy, is very technological, very interactive, and are things that I've created. That's just me. However, if you were just annotating some PDFs in therapy, then by all means, then go and send those PDFs home for extra practice. I send home PDFs for homework, like a traditional worksheet or printable cards. But to be honest, most of my families don't have a printer, and it doesn't matter. They just bring it up on their iPad or their phone and they do their practice. This is just like the considerations you would make with a client you see traditionally, because traditionally you might have a parent that's like, no, I can't do the homework, I want something I can do in the car, or all those kind of little idiosyncrasies that you know about your families, you just consider that as well. You might have a parent that's real into technology and wants to use all these things. But what I do is screen recordings. So when I email home the homework, I record my screen quickly, like 5-minute video real quick. I open up the PDF that I'm sending home and I record myself saying, I want you to do this, and they're on this page, you can find these. And I mean, hopefully they've been observing your session anyway, but it takes away from that pressure of that parent having to kind of come into the teletherapy session, see what you're doing. I want them there to see how I'm cueing, but I don't need them to learn all the moving parts of the interactive side. I send home worksheets and printables that they often don't print, but that's fine. So just wanted to point that out. When it comes to screen recordings, I use something called Screencast-O-Matic, but Loom is currently offering great free options for us with this whole COVID thing going on. So I recommend using Loom. Loom is great. Loom lets you record your screen and then send it to the family. So I've linked to Loom in the notes, just so you know. Okay, let's demo. Right, let's look at some things. Actually, I'll answer some questions first, just in case some of you have to go. Okay, GoToMeeting, if there's 2 therapists, can you have 1 subscription, but use it on 2 different devices at separate times? Okay, so with GoToMeeting, technically there's no reason why you couldn't use the same subscription between 2 therapists, and you can even make separate therapy rooms. However, you'd have to check about whether or not you could both do a session at the same time. I know you're saying it's at different times. If it's at different times, I don't see why not. Because you sign into the hub online, so there's no reason why they couldn't you just share your login with each other. You know, you just share the login, and then you could even have different therapy rooms if you wanted. I show you in the YouTube video how to set them up. But if you did want to do sessions at the same time, that would be a problem, because of course you can't be in, just like a real person can't be in 2 meetings at once. I don't think on GoToMeeting you can be in 2 meetings at once as your user, but yeah, that should work fine. Okay, I'm just looking at any other questions we might have. Client, okay, I understand that there are some things that you can get around. Anything in particular that you can increase? Okay, so it's something you can do to increase their microphone quality, but it can be tricky to hear high frequency sounds. Yeah, so pretty much for me, this is where environment comes in. If this family just doesn't have a headset, okay, true story, I've told every parent that I do teletherapy with that I want their kids to have a device. No, sorry, that I want them to have a headset, and they have never come to therapy with a headset. They're like, oh, I got it and I lost it. And yeah, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen for a second so that I can chat to you guys. So yeah, in this case, then I'd say, all right, well, if you're not going to use a headset, can you please go into a quiet room? Often, I have quite a few clients who do teletherapy in their parents' bedroom because it's really quiet. But yeah, that might be an environment thing when it comes to the microphone. Also consider how far away they're sitting from their webcam, because if they don't have a headset on, or a set of headphones with a microphone, their computer's inbuilt speaker will be what's picking up the audio. So you might ask them to move closer to the computer. I'm not sure how that helps with frequency. Yeah, or you might just insist that they use some kind of headset, or yes. So that's my advice around that. I hope that's helpful. Are there any more questions before I get into the demoing side of things? Thanks heaps for being here, guys. Means a lot that you want to listen to me at 8:15 on Tuesday? Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again, and I'll turn off my camera, and we're going to demonstrate some websites and some teletherapy materials. Remember, you are experiencing this right now the way that my students would. Obviously, I'm not used to having so many of you in one session, but you're experiencing this now as if you were getting to interact with it like a student would. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to turn off the camera and minimize this. Okay, I just want to point something out quickly that I didn't link to. Lesson Picks. I'm not sure if any of you, I'm sure most of you have heard of Lesson Picks before. It is amazing, and I used it more when I was in person sessions because the printables on here are incredible. But this is how everything that they create from Lesson Picks, if you create a resource with Lesson Picks, it comes out as a PDF. So because it's a PDF, you can then annotate it. But this is what I use to make my visual schedules. All the clip art's built in. It's really awesome, and it's only $36 a year American. So good. It's my number one go-to for recommending to therapists in general as a speech therapist. Not necessarily teletherapy, but it's good. Okay, so we'll come back to this. I want to show you the difference between a static PDF and an interactive PDF. So this is a static PDF. You may have something very similar on your computer. It's a printable set of of therapy cards for articulation. And I've shown you in the video how you could annotate on top of these in the video that's on YouTube, and do different things using the annotation tools in Adobe, which are brought up with that comment bar, which are up here. Now, an interactive PDF has been purpose-built and designed for you to use digitally, whether it be on an iPad. Pretty much 99% of interactive PDFs can be used on an iPad, or on Teletherapy platform using Adobe Acrobat Reader. So you'd bring this up in something like Adobe Acrobat Reader, then you'd share your screen with your student, just like I'm doing here. And then you can give mouse controls like I show you how to do in the video if you want them to be able to type in the interactive PDF or interact with it. So let's choose, this is the exact same set of photo cards except made as an interactive PDF for Teletherapy. So let's look at those same cards. So I've gone to K and I choose initial. I'm going to hit next. And there's our first one, and because I want 10 productions, I've got 10 tick boxes. So some interactive PDFs have tick boxes, some have tick boxes and also fillable form fields. Some are just like an actual worksheet, and except where you'd normally write, there's a text box you can click in and type in, which is it's just really great. There's some awesome interactive PDFs on Teachers Pay Teachers. I especially love the ones by Stacey Krause. And then I make a lot of ones like this that are more like digital task cards. Anyway, don't worry, I'm not just going to show you the stuff I sell, but I just wanted to point out the difference between interactive PDFs and static PDFs. Okay, so now let's get online. So other than PowerPoint games, websites are really my most used thing, generally split screened with an interactive PDF. So Boom is a platform that has been built to help you create or buy or get for free. There's a bunch of free ones. Interactive task cards, and you'll notice if you go to Boom, there's ones for maths and it's in the American standards and all that. But if you filter it by speech therapy, there are a ton. So this is my library. As you can see, I have a lot. So I'm going to show you some examples of like a traditional Boom card deck. These are interactive kind of worksheet type cards. So this is a sequencing set by Alison Fors. I'm just going to go to the pictures, and I'm not going to try and put it in order, but as you can see, you can drag and drop the pictures into the right order of the sequence, and then they're self-checking. So when I hit submit, it will tell me I'm wrong. So there's a bunch of different things like this on Boom Learning, and these work great on an iPad. So if you do end up wanting to try teletherapy in this season and then want to use all these digital resources that you've purchased, if you do buy some, you can use them on your iPad, and they're stored in the cloud, so you don't need to keep them on your computer. You sign in from any device and all of your decks will be there. I make ones that are a little less card-like and a little more game-like. So if we look at this, so we can build this picture. This is S Medial, and we're going to build this picture of lollies, for example, and put it back together. I like to just kind of really take advantage of the drag and drop features. I don't have many Boom cards. Stacey Krause is a great Boom card creator, as well as Goldie Speech Talks has some awesome ones as well, a bunch of free ones as well. But you can just go to the Boom store and then organize it by free if you want to check out some free ones and give it a go. There's a ton on here. Okay, so then another thing I want to point out that's free is abca.com. I unfortunately had to turn my ad blocker off, so these annoying ads are here. They're always appropriate, the ads that come up, and they never pop up over the game. But abca.com, I've linked to it in the notes, is amazing. And again, I use it in person in therapy as well on my computer. So the games on your computer and the website are free, but if you ever want these games as part of an app on your iPad, you can buy them as a game. But I generally just take my laptop to sessions in person. So I'm just going to clarify a question that I just saw come through. If you buy resources, you can use them on your PC and your iPad. Yes, most of the time, yes. We're going to talk TPT because that's where most people get them from, Teachers Pay Teachers. A good Teachers Pay Teachers seller will tell you in their description if you can't. They'll tell you what devices you can use it on. 90% of my store can be used both because I do both. So I want to be able to take my iPad to in-person sessions and use my computer-based stuff in a teletherapy session. Boom cards, you definitely can. Boom is an app that you can download to your iPad. You'd sign in on your iPad. I think it works on Android as well, and even maybe Kindles, I think, but don't quote me on that. You could check. And then obviously anything with an internet browser, like a computer, you can also just go to the website to play the Boom cards. So yeah, I'm just showing you some examples of a game. So like, I'm not going to show you all this, but the ABC has got like create a pizza, create an ice cream, create a car. They've got a bunch of other games too, but my students really love that as a motivator, and it's a really good alternative to your therapy cupboard of games. There's just so many fun ones that you can check out in here. Okay. Storyline Online is awesome and free again, and it is picture books being read by celebrities, and a lot of the celebrities your kids will know, and a lot of the books are really popular books. So these are videos of celebrities reading well-known books, which is really fun. Toy Theatre, another amazing helpful website for teletherapy, and also on your iPad. These are virtual manipulatives. You've got spinners, you've got dice, you've got timers, which are really great for our kiddos that need timers. You've got marble jars, you've got abacus for counting out productions, you've got counting bears, you've got a ton of math stuff, which we often use in therapy in other ways. You've got hundreds charts, you could count up your productions, and they're all interactive and so fun. You will have seen the dice in being used in the YouTube video. So great. I'm going to get to your questions, guys, just a moment. Okay, so Google Slides is another type of activity that's generally something you'd probably purchase as opposed to create, but you can create them. You might want to dive into this digital space. So this is a set of interactive task cards, and it says for object function, put the arrow to something that you cut with, and then I just move the arrow down. I'm kind of just brisking through these kind of ones and want to spend more time on showing you the free stuff. Okay, so PowerPoint games. Before I start doing PowerPoint games, I'm going to answer some questions. Okay, so I'm glad you're liking it, guys. How hard is it to make interactive PDFs versus static PDFs? Hard. No, I don't want to. No, it's if you're willing to learn, then the information's out there and it's definitely doable. It just costs money. So you'd need Adobe, the paid version of Adobe that lets you make PDFs. So it's totally possible to do. And then you can make them up and then have them on your iPad, which is awesome. And there are other things you can buy that will help you. What it's called is, if you're looking for like a program to use, you're wanting something that's a form builder. So another thing to consider, Ashley, is if you want to make interactive worksheets and stuff, use something like Google Forms. So Google Forms lets you do like tick boxes and videos and all that kind of stuff. So the reason I don't create and share Google Forms is because they're more for personal use, but I'd really recommend checking out Google Forms because it's all done for you and you could make your worksheets and use it that way, which is great. But when it comes to creating interactive PDFs, it's definitely something you can learn. So to clarify, so we've talked about that. So I hope that's answered your questions. All right, I'm going to show you PowerPoint games and then we'll finish up. Oh, I wanted to actually show you one more thing first. Epic. So ebooks are great. I have a blog post on places you can get free ebooks, and that blog post is linked in the notes on the last page. Epic is something that some people do choose to pay for because you can use it on your iPad and you can use it on a computer, and it's a huge library, huge library of digital ebooks that are a bunch of different levels of literacy levels and interests. You can find something for like any interest level, and they've also got videos which are kid safe with no ads. They've got tutorial videos on how to make different things too, like crafty videos. They've got I Spy books. They've got a ton of stuff. It's quite affordable, and if you work for a school, it's free. So if you have a school-based email address, it's free. But for most of us who are private therapists, you'd pay, and you'd pay for the parent subscription. So I contacted them, and that's what you would do. You pay for the like homeschooling subscription, and that's what I do. And then you can save collections of the books that your students really like. And some of the books read the book to the kids, and others you read the book to the children. And at the end, most of them have WH questions and main idea questions. For the ones where the book's read to the student, I actually really like it as kind of like a reward that's actually therapy, where you know, when you're packing up the last 5 minutes of a session in person, we're talking about in person now, you can just set up the book to play as their reward while you're packing up, and they're actually, you know, it's actually like a book being read to them. So yeah, and Ashley, I just want to say, I'm totally happy to talk with you more about making interactive PDFs or interactive worksheets and stuff. Feel free to get in touch with me. I definitely don't want to seem like I'm saying only I can make them. It's definitely doable. Okay, we've talked about ABC. Yeah, okay, so we've talked about all the stuff online. Okay, so PowerPoint games I'm going to talk about now. I've left this to the end because these are things I've made and I'm a little biased. Of course I love them. And these are PowerPoint games are something that it takes a lot to learn how to make. So this isn't something I'm saying you could probably go make yourself. But if you do want to see some of them, stick around. A lot of them are spinners like this. And so, for example, this is not a game necessarily as a way to show targets. So if we go to the fronting one, we can spin the spinner and it will always stop on the pair. Let's try again. So we've got key and T. So it's just like a really fun interactive way to present some targets. And these will also work on an iPad. Like 90% of the PowerPoint games in my store will work on an iPad. And I do have free ones as well. So then I've also got digital versions of things like Connect 4 and Memory and stuff. So if we look at this Connect 4 game, you can play just like you normally would, and all your speech targets are in the grid. And then I did add these animated buttons if you want to use them to encourage more productions. One thing I always think about when making PowerPoint games is really good bang for your buck. So like the kid gets to have one turn, but they've said their word 10 times. So I mostly make articulation games because it's the majority of my caseload is articulation. And then I've got things like these hidden image games where you can choose an unknown image and then, that's a known image. So if you want to see what the hidden image is first, you can pick one. I have a bunch of themes, but this is the food one. And you can then play the game by hitting the button and it stops on a number. So I'd say my word 10 times and then you'd uncover 10. So really with these games, it's just kind of like an engaging way to get in your productions. Or I do have some PowerPoint games for language stuff, but mostly they're artic, and you can split screen them. So I often split screen them next to did I close Adobe? No, I didn't. Next to my cards. So we will say our speech word and play our game, and then we can go to the next one. So being able to split screen is really great. You can bring up multiple things. You might also want to bring up a dice if you're playing a different kind of game. And then the last thing I have a ton, but I've just had to pick like a few to show you. This kind here is the only kind of game in my store that only works on a Windows computer. Most everything in my store works on an iPad, a Mac, and a Windows computer, but this only works on a Windows computer. And in my opinion, it's the funnest. Funnest is not a word, but you can pick up the game pieces and put them down here, and then you can go to the spinner, you can spin the spinner. And then you can go here and it'll take you to your targets. So we don't see any targets because you haven't put them in yet. But I've made it so you can drag and drop in targets right here. And you can change the type of target. So if it's an image, you'd hit that. But if you want it to just be words, you'd type them in here. And if you'd want them to be words and an image, then you can just drag and drop in your picture. I also have a kind where this is not buttons, and instead it's another spinner with 5 and 10 in it to get in a bunch of productions that I use for articulation, and I don't bother with adding targets. We just spin for our productions. Okay, so I'm glad you like my PowerPoint games. I could talk about them forever. If you want to learn more about PowerPoint games, I have a whole highlight on Instagram about them, or I'll talk about them for days. I've kind of hacked PowerPoint. It's pretty cool. It's not just for presentations. So let's get back to my PowerPoint presentation. Those are the things I wanted to demonstrate because I'm kind of trying to balance honoring your time. I get that it's late. But showing you some really great stuff. So I've linked to a bunch more stuff in the notes. So please go check out the notes. And please reach out if you have any questions. I could talk about this for hours. I just really want us to move into a space where we don't see this as a less type of therapy. And I really do think that so many students in New Zealand could be helped by us being able to see more of them because we're not in our cars all the time, or parents aren't bringing their kid after a full day of daycare, half eating their snack while their little baby brother's asleep in his car seat, and we're trying to do therapy in a therapy room with a very cranky child. I'm not saying that I think in-person therapy is not good. I love in-person therapy. I still do it 50% of the time, and I love it. But I really do think that teletherapy has a space for us here in New Zealand. It's not just for big countries that are spread out. We have kids that currently we're driving hours to see, and it doesn't have to be that way. And studies are coming out showing that if you use evidence-based practice and clinical reasoning, you're gonna see gains. And there are therapists all over America that do this as their full-time job. So just be encouraged and not afraid. And please reach out if you have any questions. I think I'm done, but I just want to leave space for a few more questions if there's any. Obviously, we're doing this presentation because of the current COVID kind of stuff going on, but this is something that I think is applicable all the time. Obviously, I do it all the time. Okay, so thank you everyone for taking the time to be here, and I'm just going to leave questions open. I'm also seeing all your lovely messages. Thank you all so much. It's so kind. So just checking now, if any of you are watching this in the replay, please put your questions down in the comments. Have I used teletherapy with preschoolers? Yes, I have. But again, mostly working on speech. And it's went great. They're the ones who generally can't use a mouse and keyboard. We played a lot of interactive games. We read a lot of books. You can still play songs and read actual hardcover books if you don't want to use ebooks. You can still have bubbles. You can still bring a ton of energy. You can wear a weird hat. One time I did a teletherapy session where the kid was working on, what were they? Their TH sound. So they weren't a preschooler, but this would work with a preschooler too. And we were working on the phrase, put it there. And I had Post-its, and wherever they told me to put it, I would stick it on my face, on my glasses, on my ear, on my computer. Like, yeah, you can do just like you would normally in a normal session, except you just got to be a bit creative with how you keep them engaged. The place where there is the biggest barrier sometimes is that early intervention, like late talkers stuff, because a lot of the time you really want to be there and showing the parent how. But I do know teletherapists can be very successful doing a parent coaching model with videos and things like that, with and looking at the results with parents and talking about them, which is just like we'd normally do, but except in person we're often normally there doing it with the child to show the parent. So that is one thing I will say. Social skills is another thing I want to talk about quickly. You can work on social skills in teletherapy. Of course, there is that added difference in the sense that gets taken away than when you're in a room with a bunch of kids working on your social skills. However, this is another thing I know that many of I say colleagues because they're fellow like bloggers and teletherapy trainers and stuff, that they do a very effective social skills therapy in teletherapy. What they're normally working on more so though is kind of the play skills when it comes to like older kids. So being able to put up with losing, taking turns, reading body language, and there's lots of different no print resources. Stacey Krause is another, I talk about her a lot, but she has really great stuff for older kids working on social skills. And another one is Badger State Speech Therapy. If you need any of these links, let me know. She does amazing digital social skills resources that have YouTube videos you can watch and then worksheets you can fill in. But again, that's kind of the more like academic side of working on social skills, and that when it comes to the actual nuance of being in a room with someone having a conversation, those conversation skills, of course, it's not the same, but you can still work on it. Yeah, so I do know that people work on social skills. Okay, all right, so there doesn't seem to be any more questions. And so I'm going to finish this recording, and my email is in the notes, and you can email me. I prefer Facebook Messenger because I'm a millennial, but you can email me. That's totally fine. You choose if you want to Facebook message me or email me. Take care, guys. I hope this has been helpful, and have a good evening.